I want to walk you through what a typical day in my life actually looks like as an engineer who's working a six-figure project management job in oil and gas. I think a lot of people studying engineering who are currently in college have a general idea of what engineers do in the real world, but don't know the details of what the day to day actually looks like. And in this video, I'm going to break down what my job really consists of, how my time is spent on an average day, how I deal with real world engineering problems, and what you should realistically expect if you're thinking about going into engineering. And then, towards the end of the video, I'm going to give you my honest take on how to position yourself to land a high paying role in engineering. Before I get into a typical day in my life as an engineer, I want to hit on two things that I think are important to understand up front, because this would have helped me a lot when I was still in school trying to figure all this out. The first one is the difference between engineering in college versus engineering in the real world. In my experience, there is a pretty big disconnect between what you think the job is going to look like and what it actually ends up being. One of the biggest things that caught me off guard is that in 4.5 years of working as a project manager, I've basically never touched a calculator, which is kind of wild when you think about how much time you spend in school grinding through those complex math equations and using the good old TI-84. Also, does that make me an unk now, or are college kids still using TI-84s? Please let me know down in the comments. But anyways, I remember sitting there learning Laplace transforms in college, going through Calc 4, getting into quantum physics, electromagnetic forces, all of this pretty intense stuff that just makes your brain feel scrambled. And looking back, it's honestly crazy that I was even able to comprehend like half of it. I didn't really see myself ending up in oil and gas when I first started college, which is definitely a more hands on, blue collar type of environment. And I actually really enjoy that aspect of it. But I always had this picture in my head that engineering meant you'd be sitting there every day running calculations, solving complex equations, doing highly technical work nonstop. And the reality is, I don't do any of those on a daily basis. What school really taught me, more than anything, is that I can handle pressure, I can stay disciplined, and I can solve problems when there isn't an obvious answer right in front of me. That translates really well to the real world, more than any specific formula in college that I ever learned. It also builds that sense of personal accountability because nobody is going to hold your hand, not in school, and definitely not once you're working. In college, a professor might tell you something is due, but they're not going to chase you down to make sure you get that assignment done. And it is the exact same thing in your career, except now the stakes are higher. The other big piece, and honestly, this is something people just don't talk about enough, is how important networking is once you get into the workforce. Working in corporate environments has made it really clear to me that a lot of opportunities come down to who you know, and yes, you still have to perform and do your job at a high level, but relationships matter more than people want to admit it. I've seen people get promoted because they've built strong connections with the right people, and you can either sit there and complain about it, or you can get better at playing the game. That means working on your communication, getting to know your coworkers, building relationships with management, and being open about what you actually want out of your career. I've found that being transparent goes a long way because at the end of the day, nobody's going to advocate for you better than you can for yourself. I always think back to school with this because if you were the type of person who went to office hours, asked a lot of questions, built that relationship with your professor, you probably had a better shot at passing when things were borderline. If you've got one student sitting at a 69 for the class grade and another student in the exact same spot, but one of the students actually showed up, put in the effort, and built that connection with the professor, you already know who's getting the benefit of the doubt. It's really no different in your career. So, with that in mind, let's get into what my day actually looks like as an engineer. To give you a real picture of what my day to day looks like, I work in an oil refinery, which means my schedule is usually around 7 to 4, and I'm on a 980 schedule, which, if you're not familiar, is honestly one of the best schedules out there because you work 9 hours a day and then 8 hours on the Friday that you are working, and then you get every other Friday off. And it just makes life a lot more manageable. I used to work 410s as an intern, and I thought that was an awesome schedule too because you get every single Friday off of 410s, but those days that you were working felt really long. I think 980s is a perfect balance between a normal 9 to 5 schedule and the 410s schedule. Now, as a project manager, I'm not just working on one thing start to finish. I'm managing multiple projects at completely different stages at the same time. So, at a high level, my job is to take a project from an idea and push it all the way through engineering design, where the team and I are figuring out the scope, the cost, the schedule, and making sure everything is designed safely and it actually makes sense. And then carrying that all the way into the field construction where it's physically being built out in the refinery. And even after all that, I'm still responsible for making sure the documentation and the drawings are updated correctly. Which I'll be honest is probably the least exciting part of the job, but it's also one of those things that really matters long term. I still to this day get so frustrated when I'm looking for a specific piece of documentation and it's not there because the project manager from 20 years ago didn't properly close out their project. But yeah, most of the projects I work on don't just come out of nowhere either. They usually start with operators in the field or other engineers who are deep into the knowledge of specific refinery units, and those people will identify a problem. There might be some piece of equipment that keeps failing and it's a reliability issue. Maybe there's an opportunity to make the company more money through optimization or yield improvements. Or maybe it's something tied to process safety. And then that idea eventually turns into a project that someone like me is responsible for running. Since my background is in electrical engineering, anything with electrical scope tends to get routed my way. But I can run just about any type of project because I'm not expected to be the expert in everything. I'm expected to build a team of people who are the experts and then manage that team and the project through a structured process that we know works. But I do enjoy the electrical and instrumentation projects the best because I can leverage my knowledge in that field to better run that project and to add another layer of technical understanding. And that project process typically moves through a few main phases, starting in what we call the conceptual phase, where you're really just trying to define what the project even is, and then moving through feasibility and definition into detailed design, and then into implementation out in the field, and finally into document closeout, which again is not the most glamorous part of it all, but it's one of those phases that will come back to bite you if you don't do it right. So on any given day, I might be bouncing between all of that. I could have a project that's actively being constructed, which means I'm spending more time out in the refinery actually walking things down, talking to the contractors, throwing on my hard hat and seeing something that I designed actually come to life, which again is one of the most satisfying parts of the job because it's like one of those full circle moments. Like you designed it on paper and now it's being built. And then maybe in that same day, I could be in a conference room kicking off a brand new project, starting from scratch, working through the scope, the budget, the timeline, and getting everyone aligned on what we're trying to accomplish. So, the obvious question is how do you actually step into a role like this straight out of college and not feel completely overwhelmed trying to figure this shit out? The honest answer is you don't have it all figured out, not even close. And a lot of it is really on the job training. I mentioned this earlier, but what engineering in school taught me was how to think through problems, how to learn quickly, and how to solve problems when things aren't clearly defined. And that's what being a project manager comes down to at its core. It's not the most technical role in the world, but you absolutely have to be able to navigate problems, connect the dots, make decisions without having all the perfect information in front of you. And on top of that, you don't just walk into a refinery one day and understand how everything works. It is a massive, complex system that takes oil from the ground and makes it into products that we use on a daily basis. It takes time, patience, and honestly, a lot of listening before things start to click and you understand how the refinery works. Which is why I always tell people to find a solid mentor or at least a good support system early on at whatever job that you have, because having someone that you can go to with questions makes a huge difference. And you have to be willing to ask those questions, even if you feel like you should already know the answer. Because I will still ask questions all the time, and especially early on. It's completely normal to make mistakes as long as you're learning from them and not repeating them. One thing that helped me a lot was just being intentional about getting out of my chair and into the field. Actually, walking through the different process units of the refinery, talking to the operators, seeing how things run on a day to day. Those are the people who really understand what's going on at a practical level. Every time I get assigned a new project, I'd go walk it down, get familiar with the area, and then that's when everything would start to click a little bit more for me, and I'd start asking the right questions that would come to my mind. Over time, I started building this mental picture on how everything connects in the refinery. It made it a lot easier to engineer my projects and manage my projects in a way that makes sense to me. I used to spend a lot of time thinking about where I would actually end up after getting my electrical engineering degree. Because when you're in school, you're just exposed to all these different paths. You got big tech, manufacturing, chemical plants, defense, automotive, consulting. And most people don't have this mapped out yet for where they want to land after college. I definitely didn't. I didn't see myself going into oil and gas at all. But looking back, it's honestly one of the best things for my career development. Not just technically, but from a leadership standpoint. Because the role I'm in now has forced me to grow in ways that I probably wouldn't have if I stayed in a more traditional, just purely technical engineering path. What I've realized is that the industry you choose matters way less than the skills you're building while you're in that industry, especially early in your career. And for me, project management has been a huge boost to my career because it's given me the opportunity to think creatively, like solve real world problems, all at the same time while I'm leading people and coordinating teams. I've found I really enjoyed this role. You got to constantly balance different priorities. You got to constantly balance working with those different personalities. You're really just figuring out how to move things forward, even when the scope of the project is not perfectly clear. If I had to give one piece of advice, it would be to keep an open mind when it comes to where you land. Your first job doesn't lock you into one career path forever, it is just your starting point. And what matters more is whether you're putting yourself in a position to grow in your career. And for me, even though I didn't see myself being a project manager for the rest of my career, I can confidently say it's one of the best things that could have happened to me early on because it's built a foundation of skills, that being like communication, leadership, decision making. Those skills are going to carry over into whatever other job I decide to do next. So that's all I have for this video. If you have any specific project management questions or questions about my job and how I got into personal finance with it, or any questions in general, leave a comment down below. And for those leaving comments, liking the video, watching all the way to the end, thank you so much for the support on this channel. As always, I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.